Thank you all for coming tonight. This is the Financial Management Association. We have Ben ESGET from Wealthmark speaking about quantum portfolio theory. I don't know anything about this, but he does, so I'm going to let him talk, so enjoy.
Thanks for having me. Before we get going, I just want to say I really appreciate you guys coming out. This is the first time I've gone through this with anyone except for some friends, so it's a little frightening. And feel free to poke holes. Ultimately, Zach asked me if I wanted to come and talk, and he's like, "Why don't you talk about running a hedge fund or this?" And I was like, "Dude, that's going to be so boring." I've done this for 14 years. And most of the time I just come up here to entertain you guys and give you some stuff to think about and shake up your brains. But this is something I've worked on for 5 years, and some of the work on it goes back 20 years. Let's see, I got a few people I need to give credit to before I get going. One was my dad. My dad was a code breaker in Vietnam. He helped me do some of the mathematics on this and work through some of the problems. One of them is a Western alumni named Jason Sears. Most of you probably don't know that name. He was a double major, math and econ, and he's who I started doing financial modeling with in the 90s. I invited him tonight. I don't think he's going to make it. He's the highest paid mathematician I know, and he owns his own insurance company, so busy dude. And I need to thank Brian Cathcart. Brian was a institutional consultant for Warts, and I worked through a lot of the ideas with him, and he died a couple years ago. And he specifically wanted to have some credit, so that's why I said that. Other than that, I'm really excited to be here at Western to do this. If there was a place to do it, this is where I'd want to do it. This university has just given me so much, still does. I watched Zach perform live the other night with ET, so that was kind of fun. So yeah, so let's get going. And again, stay open-minded. If there's things that you don't vibe with, feel free to ask questions. Like I said, this is kind of the first time I put it out here, so let's go on. So this is the title of the talk. What do Warren Buffett, quantum physics, and data arrays have in common? And by the time we're done, you should have an idea of that. So the question I want to start you with is, why is Warren Buffett so rich? And we will answer this before it's over, but I just want you to get that in your mind. Start thinking through all the variables. Why? Why is that guy so dang rich? So I'm going to go through some math today, but for those of you that don't like math, don't freak out, because I'm just going to key in on the key variables. And I'm not going to present my full equation tonight because it would be way too much, but I am going to show you some of the theorems that came out of it. So we'll keep it light. This is a capital asset pricing model. The return of an asset equals the risk-free rate of return plus the beta of an asset times the market rate of return minus the risk-free rate of return. Simple enough. I want you to key in on the risk-free rate of return specifically. This equation has bothered me for 20 years. When I got an MBA, I wrote a paper called the crap M. And you'll see why in a sec. And the reason was, I think sometimes to do something unique, you have to question what you're seeing if it doesn't make sense. And it's not defiant, it's because you gotta keep pushing. One of my favorite hedge fund managers, Stanley Druckenmiller, says, nobody has a patent on the truth. Here's the Black-Scholes model for pricing options. This, I got to give the hat tip specifically to Jason, because when I walked him through the equation, he goes, you should take a look at the Black-Scholes model too. I want to focus here specifically on standard deviation. Okay? Modern portfolio theory. Okay? This is, as far as I know, still used the entire industry over, how to allocate assets. Expected rate of return on one axis, risk or volatility, specifically standard deviation on the other. Any combination of assets should give you some optimal risk-return trade-off Even Forbes, you can see, still uses it today. That's why I left that on there. Sharpe ratio. Return divided by standard deviation. 3 of those equations won Nobel Prizes. Kind of interesting. Long-term capital management had some of those Nobel laureates on their staff, and yet collapsed. It's interesting. Something nobody talks about. Should drive people crazy in the industry. We just gloss over it. At one point, they had 25 PhDs on staff. They probably had more academics than anyone on staff at the time in the world. The government had to bail them out. It was a 25 sigma event. That means it couldn't have happened in the history of the world using traditional statistics. So instead of going to the models and saying these models aren't working, we just stuck with them. Now I want to get into kind of the heart of the matter. Data arrays, optimizations, Nash equilibriums, adaptive markets, and observations. Anybody here heard of Dr. Andrew Lo? Dr. Andrew Lo is the head of quantitative research at MIT. He wrote a book called Adaptive Markets. I believe his work is a little more accurate than most. So what I want to show you now is why I think that. So what I was trying to understand forever is how different variables were affecting markets through time. And what I noticed is that it wasn't linear. It should have been linear. It should have been a linear pattern to it. I specifically was looking at the housing market, the stock market, and interest rates. And I noticed it wasn't having a normal effect. What I noticed is that different variables were impacting risk and return at different time lengths in a non-linear fashion, sometimes exponential, sometimes not at all. I'll give you a good thought experiment on this. Best way I can explain this. Let's talk about something we all know would impact risk and return over time. Climate change could have an impact on risk, right? We all could agree with that. Do you think climate change will impact risk in the next 2 minutes? Anyone? No, not much. So then you go, what does impact markets in the next 2 minutes? That's an interesting question. And what you find is that you get an entire array of variables that have outsized weights at different times. Climate change might have a huge effect in 30 years. And so when you started looking at the world this way, you realized that risk, return, and time were very related. In fact, under the old equations, you would say standard deviation. Let's just draw that for a sec. Okay? That's what that would look like. Now, some of the workarounds is, well, there's fat tails. Okay, fine, there's fat tails. So it looks like this. Sort of. But that's not the full story, because you take either one of these and apply it through time, right? And I'm saying at this time, the risk is either this, or it's this, and it's the same here. And essentially, if I graphed a risk through time, it would be a straight line. Standardized. Standard risk through time, standard deviation. That's the whole point. But when I looked at the data, that isn't what was happening. And so ultimately I wrote an equation to try to explain what was happening. We'll get into that in just a sec. One of the other things I noticed is that to understand risk in its entirety, I needed to take risk and time to infinity. Right? Otherwise, I was just explaining pieces of it. So I needed to understand risk at the limit. Now, when I started to understand risk at the limit, a lot of weird things happened. I realized you could either optimize the portfolio for a short time length, like 2 minutes, a week, a year, 20 years, or maybe even infinity. And what the problem was is anytime I optimized a portfolio for a short length of time, I unoptimized for a long length of time. You couldn't have both, by definition, because there were different variables impacting it. So I tried to understand risk at the limit. Now, something interesting happened. My risk patterns were not linear. Actually, before I go into the equation, I want to show you one more thing. The other thing I could see is that every single time had its own competitive market environment, like an ecosystem, okay? So let's say I optimized right here, and I'm a hedge fund, and I was crushing it, just destroying it. Well, what would happen? A lot of eyeballs would look at me, right? And I would attract a lot of attention, a lot of competition. This is what Dr. Andrew Lowe means by adaptive markets. They adapt very quick. And the other thing I noticed is that each time would also have its own Nash equilibrium, but it was also changing. So ultimately, the best Nash equilibrium would be infinity, because it would have the least competition. In fact, it's the only one that does. The other thing I noticed, most of the people that were competing at anything at short time frames usually would always go out of business, because they'd get cannibalized away. The few exceptions, Renaissance Technologies, Citadel, they literally compete at such short time frames, they've embedded themselves into the market itself. That should be illegal, in my opinion. It's kind of gross, it's front running, it's legalized theft. But the way they've done it is they've embedded completely into the market. They are the market themselves. So they are essentially huge monopolies, zero competition, zero chance of competition. And I think they, based on what I can see, they do not compete with each other because they're about 2 hours difference. And I think they purposely just stay in their own lanes. That's kind of what I think. So let's take it out to infinity. Well, when I did that, I wrote an equation to do this that would explain the math around that, and I'll graph it in a sec. I'm not going to get into the equation because it's too much, but I'll show you the 4 theorems that popped out. What is a theorem? A theorem is a generally proposed, not self-evident, but proved chain of reasoning or truths that are generally accepted once you see the full line of reasoning. That's the Oxford Dictionary. And they're explained in plain English, which makes them easy to understand. That's why I'm sticking to those. 4 theorems. Risk is not standardized through time. Kind of already went through that. Standardized risk understates risk in the short term, overstates risk in the medium term, and understates in the long term. Risk, return, and time are geometrically linked. You literally can't even talk about one without talking about the other two. They're tied together. And that's where I think people are really missing the boat here. Finally, and this is be the interesting one I graph, as my time series data t approached infinity, the number of variables I could identify that would impact risk also approached infinity. Something leveled it. A meteor, climate change, who knows? Ultimately it goes to 0. And that means risk can't even be defined, and there is no risk-free rate of return. It doesn't exist. It was just made up. What this looks like on a graph, from what I can see, when you invest any amount of money, here's risk, here's time, and we go to infinity. It starts very high and comes down exponentially almost to 0 over time and stays there. But at some point, it's a parabola. And that's the tricky part. And that's realistically what I can see in the data. Okay, great. What do we do with that? So what are markets? From what I can tell, what a market is a bet. It is a bet on an unknowable future. So then you go, well, what bets are humans making? I believe we are on some level, making a calculus into the future. We're deriving a chain of data as a species way into the future based on our subset of data from our recent past. What I think are the two biggest drivers of markets, one is capitalism itself. When I look at markets, instead of trying to define it specifically, but say, hey, what if markets were more like a wave occurring through time, right? Why do waves occur? Well, the moon, gravitational pull, water slamming into the ocean. And so I'm looking at the big variables that are creating the waves we call markets. I believe one is capitalism. And you can see here's the world GDP growth over the last 2 millennium. That's exponential. That's the wave. That's the wave we're projecting into the future. But I also think there's a second variable, and I think it's population growth. And you can see they're occurring simultaneously. It's impossible to tease the data out from one another. They're tied at the hip because it's an emergent phenomenon, just like an electron particle cloud or something like that. It's evolving, and we're just in the middle of it making projections. From what I can tell, the stock market is roughly a 70% bet on capitalism continuing to continue and a 30% bet on population continuing to grow. And I think the housing market is the opposite. That's what I think ultimately these bets are. And I think the reason I'm willing to do this presentation tonight is I think we're going to see the population growth slow, and I think in the next 100 years it's almost for sure. And I think that will make us reevaluate capitalism and population growth and all these things. I can tell you, there is part of me that wanted to keep all this to myself, and I thought about it. I've used this model to very effectively determine which hedge funds I thought would do well. I could see how they were using data and specifically their strategies in connection with time being the key variable. In fact, one of them in 2020 was the most successful hedge fund that year, over 5,000% return. What's the problem? Well, that's going to attract a lot of attention. See, it worked too well. So you can see these theories do work. It's just how you want to use them. And then you go, okay, so now we're going to study the wave at the longest period of time, infinity, and look at the big drivers that are driving this wave. How did I know I got this right? It took me a month of essentially sleepless nights to work out the equation. The reason I think I did it right is Brene Mendel left a little breadcrumb for someone just like me. He wrote one book and a series of papers on the subject of finance. Does anyone here know who Brene Mandelbrot is? Few. Brene Mandelbrot created the math of fractals. He was a professor of mathematics at Yale. He was a finance professor for 1 year at Harvard, only 1 year. But I think his ideas were just a little too out there at the time. In fact, if you look at most of the Nobel Prize winning equations I talked about earlier, those equations were being written while he was developing the math for fractals. So they wouldn't have even had the right math to explain how the world worked at that time. What they did get right is they connected risk and return. The piece they missed was time and the standardized piece. And you can see then that not only is Andrew Lo correct, and not only were the earlier Nobel laureates correct, but it was only a piece of the bigger puzzle, and Brene Mandelbrot got the closest. This was the conclusion from a paper he wrote in 1997. What's interesting about this conclusion? This paper was written before big data, before data science, and essentially before a lot of the modern technologies we have today. I think it's brilliant because he says, right there, he says, it is the dearth of applicable statistical methods. Well, that would include standard deviation. And he says, we propose in the future new econometric methods, like big data, would be needed for models that are both time invariant and scale invariant. They would all have to somehow incorporate infinity. He knew this. I think he was a genius. I think he should have won a Nobel Prize, and it's sad he didn't, but that's just my 2 cents. So why is this important now? I think one of the interesting things that's going to happen in your life, my hunch, I can't prove this, will be that this will be the method all finance will use in the future. I think this will be standard. I think it will be more and more obvious as we have AI, bigger databases, but most importantly, quantum computing. I think quantum computing will make this not only obvious, but also easy to work with. And I think one of the reasons the old methods have stuck around so long is they just were a lot easier than this, obviously, because this you have to take into account time. So why was Warren Buffett so rich? Warren Buffett's so rich because he started at age 11. The other variables are important, but nothing is close to a huge time frame of starting at age 11. I heard just yesterday, Charlie Munger, age 99. He started pretty young too. Huge amount of time to compound. So one of the interesting things about this, and my question to you, now that I give you this information or way to think of the world or however you want to deal with it, what are you going to do with it? It's your life. Maybe it's wrong. Or Bruce Lee said, take in what works for you and reject the rest. That's fine, reject what you want. So the question is, what are you going to do with this thought process? And I'm going to just show you what I did with it. So for me, the transition was, okay, if risk is limitless, we as a species, me as a person, many of the people I know are putting way too much weight on money. And it seemed like, honestly, kind of a sad way to live your life. And if something major did happen, they would even be sadder because they sold out their entire life for something that wasn't a sure bet. So I redefined the way I looked at wealth in terms of relationships, health, and money. And then I noticed something really interesting about these 3 specifically. Everyone's born at different levels here. Some people have Asperger's, some people have autism, some people are born broke. I was born on welfare, but had great parents and healthy. The other interesting thing about these 3 in particular, and it's why I think they're wealth, you can actually improve your lot by applying good principles. Why we even study finance and investing. But the irony of life, no matter what you do, they all end up at 0. Right? Isn't that the big secret of it all? No matter how hard you work on these, you can go to the gym for the rest of your life, it's still gonna end at 0. I recently learned 3 of my favorite investors all lost kids. 3. Charlie Munger being one of them. Can you believe that? We look up to them, think they had it all made. But ultimately, you realize they're still dealing with 3 forms of wealth, not 1. Now, when you really think about this and you think about, okay, well then why go to the gym at all? Why have friends? Why have kids? Why save money? I think for me, ultimately, it's because, well, let's just talk about investing. You have to be able to imagine a future version of yourself. And you have to care about that person. You have to imagine relationships that would be richer with time being the variable. And you go to the gym because you don't want to be old and decrepit, right? So ultimately, I think you have to have a lot of love for yourself. I think investing is one of the highest forms of self-love because you have to literally take away from your current version of yourself, put it into some weird thing like an IRA for way down the road for a guy that may not be alive. That takes a lot of creative thinking, a lot of self-love, and ironically, it's a lot like going to the gym. It takes a lot of work, a lot of personal discipline. So when is quantum portfolio theory? When is time? So when would be the right time to start investing? Probably age 11 or 8 or 1, or it's always the right time. When's the right time to go to the gym? Every day. When's the right time to eat well? Every day. When's the right time to go to breakfast with a friend and invest in your relationships? Every day. Those are all investments. It's just a different way to look at them. And it's a better way to look at it because money is not guaranteed. It's right there. It goes to infinity. The risk is infinite. And we are living in a world, I believe, where these realities are going to get tested. I think specifically population growth is going to slow down dramatically. I think it will upend the housing market. Why are housing prices so high? I'm running out of boardroom, but I'll do one more. Yeah, I believe housing prices are high because you have the 2 largest populations that have ever walked on planet America buying homes at the same time. The boomers and the millennials, right? At the exact same time, you have the 2 largest populations that have ever walked on planet America trying to buy homes at the same time. And instead of the government taking tax rates up and interest rates up to make it less appealing, what did they do? They kept interest rates to 0 and added more tax incentives. Of course, prices should be as high as they're ever going to be. For the prices to even stay this high, take interest rates out of it. You would need the millennials to be having enough kids to offset all of the baby boomers about 20 years into the future. And guess what? They're not doing it. In fact, it's interesting because what appears to be the biggest threat to the markets right now, based on the data I'm looking at, is it has gotten so expensive to own a home and have kids, people are just opting out. Well, I already showed you it's one of the biggest drivers of markets at all. Well, that's a little scary. It means all of these realities are going to get tested in the next 100 years. That's what I think. I think rates are 0 because the population started slowing in year 2000. And that's how they've dealt with it, by piling on more debt. Well, how's that going to work if you have less people? You need more people to pay off more debt, not less. So you can see, most of these assumptions are probably going to get tested, which means if you put all of your eggs in that basket, you'll probably be unhappy. But if you have a lot of friends, if you're healthy, and you still save money regardless, you'll do all right. When I figured this out was I was at Dachau, the German internment camp, and I realized there was no money. In fact, they sewed pockets onto the garments with no bottom. So you would remember you had no assets. That's how cruel it was. But the people who survived were the ones that were healthiest and had the best friend networks. And you can see it was real wealth when the rest was taken away. That's it. Questions? Thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, so at what point does that risk get minimized? Like at what time?
Yeah.
Is that time?
It comes down dramatically over 10 years, and it gets to probably a critical threshold at about year 20. And I think this is actually really important because what this means, it means portfolio managers are not the end-all be-all. This industry has an obsession with PMs because they make the most money. This actually would suggest financial planning is way more important than people think because if you haven't saved up enough and you've got 20 years left to live or retire or whatever, then it's a real variable. There's no other way around it. It's serious. You have to deal with it head on. It's different for different assets, but definitely for stocks or 60-40 or a mix of any kind, I would say 20 years. You can reduce this to about 15 with something like risk parity, a little better. But you still have to deal with the time variable head on. Ideally, if you want to have a great portfolio, I mean, Warren Buffett's standard deviation of volatility was like 22. For a portfolio like that, you're probably looking at 40 years. I think they're gonna probably get forced to. But you know what's scary is if you look at the data on population, it appears to be global. So I don't know. I follow Peter Zehan's work pretty close, and I think it's pretty scary. I think capitalism survives no matter what, or some form of it. My belief is that in the next 50 years, probably 30, we are going to have to move to something called, what economists call steady state economics. Has anyone heard this term? You have?
I've heard before, yeah.
Steady state economics is when you move from a growing economy to one that doesn't grow. And how does that look? Obviously, as a species, we go there no matter what, or we go extinct. It's so obvious. Like, you can't, every model in the world is built on some crazy perpetual growth model, right? So we are going to have to steady state it out. Maybe dividends go way up. Maybe we don't invest so much for the future. I'm not sure. You probably need higher taxes and some social safety nets in that world. I'm not sure. I hope we can move to what I call steady state capitalism. That would be something more holistic, where we take into account the environment, one another. We work more cooperatively instead of it just dog eat dog, make as much money as you can. I think that probably won't work. And I think you can see steady state economics as a necessary way to move forward, and probably even steady state capitalism. That mean we have to evolve as a species? I don't know, because we are definitely not wanting to go there on our own. And you know what forces evolution is environmental pressures usually. So maybe we'll evolve, I don't know. But you can see we're gonna have to deal with it. I do think one of the coolest things about humans is, as far as I can tell, we're the only species that can decide how it wants to evolve. We have choice, we have agency. We don't have to accept these models, we can change them, we can adopt them. We accept the ones we're given as the end all be all in truth, but we can change. And I think if there's enough environmental pressure to change, maybe we'll choose that path. So that's my hope. Anyone else? More questions?
What do you believe that the capital model was a crap model?
Because it was based on a risk-free rate of return. And I couldn't even comprehend a world where there was anything that was risk-free. I mean, it just sounded like somebody just made something up to in a doctoral thesis because he didn't know what else to say. I mean, it just seemed preposterous to me. It still does. Risk-free in a world of risk. I mean, go tell that to why do you think the guy I worked on this was an actuary? We would just laugh at these models for years. We're like, what are you talking about? Risk-free? You live in a world of risk. You know, in Russia, the currency went to zero and the stock market went to zero at the same time. Where's your risk-free then? It doesn't exist. That's financial death. Financial death exists. That's the point. That's the equation. It exists. It's real. Don't base your whole life on a fantasy. Yeah.
Do you think it'll take something like financial death in the United States to disrupt our current exponential growth expectations?
I think the population slowing would be absolutely mind-bogglingly bad. In terms of asset prices not continuing to expand, debt not being able to expand, credit not being able to expand, but specifically, how do you pay off the national debt without inflating the heck out of everything if there's no one to pay it off? So I think that's not a small thing. I think the population slowing is terrifying. And it's necessary. What are we going to do? We're going to go to 60 trillion people? I mean, what does it end? Like, just more and more and more people? So that's why you can see, as a species, we will get forced into steady state economics eventually. Hopefully we choose it on our own before we end up in something even worse situation. And I think it'd be good. I think we need to learn to live I mean, what's the dirty word in finance? What's the dirty word in modern America? Satiation, enough, grateful, right? It's always just more. Kardashian mindset, crazy, it's crazy. You can't evolve, that's guaranteed extinction. And you'll see it in the economic world way before it hits the rest of the world. People talk about environmental, the economy would collapse before the ecology did. It would be a nightmare economically. And I think that's what people need to realize. They're so obsessed with their money, they're not even looking at the environment. Oh, there won't be any money, there won't be any, it will all go. There won't be any people. How are you going to feed them and house them? And of course, we need to adopt this mindset. We always have. We're just now waking up to it as a group, which is why I'm talking about it tonight. I think it's important. And I think you guys are hopeful. You're here tonight to hear this, and you can poach holes in it and take it. But hopefully it impacts the way you look at the world. Any other question? Yeah.
What time horizon would you recommend people our age invest in?
I think you guys should. I think it's somewhat tied to your saving rate. So what I think you should do and what you'll do are probably two different things. I think you should try to reach what I call escape velocity, which means you can save enough by the age of, say, 50, 60, whenever you want to retire, that your time frame becomes infinite. Most people won't do that. If you can't do that, then you have to deal with shorter time frames and incorporate more risk into your equation. I think you can, well, Warren Buffett proved it. You can outsave your time frame. I would say his time frame's infinite. You can do that too. He started at 11. I started at 16. Time's a big thing. You're still young. And you can save enough to outrun the time boogeyman. If you're not going to save for that, well, then, I don't know. Then you got to deal with more risk. Yeah.
Do you think there will be a push to, say, increase birth rates?
I'm almost positive, yeah, at some point. And that'll be equally problematic because, that's a great question. Actually, that's a brilliant question because you can see that's where they'll go. How do we stop it? Make more babies. No, we don't need more babies. We need to be satiated, right? We can't go to 60 billion people. We just need to learn to live holistically within our means, steady state economics. But of course, they'll try to solve it that way because that's a political quick fix, which will be a nightmare. And it will just end up in a worse situation, most likely. It really, if you look at it, every economic theory, every economic model is based on a perpetual growth model. Ironically, none of the finance models are built on infinity, but every economic model is bonkers, right? And so they want it to expand forever. When you take risk out forever, you see that none of that's compatible. So ultimately, yeah, I think, of course, that politicians will try to solve it that way, but it's not a solution. It'll be worse. It's already happening. Japan's trying to give out some form of like a stimmy check to make more babies. But I mean, that's not the answer is not more people. It's learning. We can quickly overpopulate. Even Elon Musk says we need to go to Mars before we go extinct. Well, he can see the writing on the wall. I'm hoping he's wrong. Let's make heaven here on Earth. Let's not go to Mars. I don't want to go to Mars. That sounds terrible. One of my friends is a world famous cancer doctor. She says everyone will get cancer on their way to Mars. I don't want to go to Mars. I have zero desire. Elon can go. I don't care. Jeff, put Bezos on there too. They can all go. But I think we need to evolve. We need to accept that this is our ecosystem. This is our home. And that requires living in harmony with it and having some sort of steady state economics. More consumerism is never going to be the solution. More people for more consumption can't be the solution forever. Anyone else? Yeah.
Just because you said earlier that Citadel and Renaissance are like
Yeah.
whatever in the market, I figured I should invest in them, right? And they don't compete, right?
Yeah. That would be great if they were even open to outside investors at this point. You're talking about two of the most successful hedge funds of all time, both billionaires. Renaissance is famous for charging 4 and 40, I think that's right, and still returning 45% a year. When I said this is legalized stuff, that was not an exaggeration. And how do I know this? I've read everything about them. I've worked at all their models. I am positive they're some of the only people in the world that have this similar math. And I know they know specifically the time frames they're looking at. And I think on purpose they don't go into the other guy's lane because they know they'll get shredded. Which, by the way, if you are thinking about day trading, if you're thinking about any kind of short-term little thing, I'm just telling you right now, the most sophisticated mathematicians of the world with the most armament, the most powerful machines have already got a corner. They are just waiting for you to enter that space so they can annihilate you. Do not kid yourself. Most people way underestimate the competition levels at anything under about 10 years. It's bonkers. It has to be. Otherwise, money would be meaningless. If it was that easy to win, who would care about money? It needs to be gnarly bad at that level. And they are brutal. They are absolute money-making machines, and they will skin you alive.
If you gave your equation to AI, could you make money meaningless, in which case people may be satiated?
Well, one of the interesting things about money is it's a social game, right? We made up the rules, which means some of the rules are social. So what do I know about the money game? The best way I can explain the money game is, to me, it feels exactly like Monopoly. Now, a little interesting fact about the game Monopoly, it was invented by a socialist to teach Americans how crap. Don't make money your whole life because it'll let you down. Yeah.
We were just talking about this. In the event of a steady state, I guess, approach to
Yeah.
growth, we know that technology continues to advance. What is stopping us from then switching back to a perpetual growth model, given like something like the Malthusian theory?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's something I've thought a lot about. And I don't think it will even need to be the environment that limits it. I think our own anatomy is the ultimate limiter on this. Who here knows the movie WALL-E, the blob that floats? That would be that future. If you really look at the human body, we are not adapting well to technology. Forget the environment. We can't. Blue screens, microplastics. I have a lot of research that shows the human body never even adapted to fire. Our jaws, why we pull out wisdom teeth. So more technology will just lead you to obliteration. Technology is it's like a sword, and we are a young species that hasn't learned how to wield it very well. And right now we're just whipping it around, cutting ourselves, cutting everyone. We think it's great. Of course, it's a great thing. It's powerful. But we have zero self-control and zero control of it. There needs to be some sort of framework, ideally in that world, where we look at technologies and go, is it good for us? Is it good for the planet? And right now, the only framework for technologies is, can I sell it? That's the problem. And that will lead to extinction. Of course it will. Zero way around. In fact, it's mathematically proven. Yeah.
I guess if we did have technology that was good for the planet and good for us, would we then still want to grow as a species?
Well, we might not, and that maybe.
It's a contentment then?
Well, maybe we'd learn to be happy and live in our ecosystems, and that'd be great. That's what a lot of nature does, and they seem stoked.
But wouldn't that then mean you would be happy enough to reproduce and have children, and then that would lead?
Well, we'd be at a steady state with the environment.
It would be a perpetual.
Well, yeah, it'd be some kind. It wouldn't be exploding off the charts all the time, which is completely nonsense. And that's ultimately would be great. It'd be great for humans. I hope that's where we go. If you really think about it, humans are a very, very, very young species. You could actually argue we're the least sophisticated, not the most. Mother Nature has given us the least time. We have yet to prove that we won't blow ourselves up. So I hope we can evolve out beyond that, and I'm not so sure. So, and I think money and economics are a huge part of that. And getting this piece down, having at least the right models and frameworks, big deal. It gives us a shot. Yeah.
I've heard a lot of really smart people describe cryptocurrencies and especially Bitcoin as being deflationary. How do cryptocurrencies participate in your plan in your model?
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I think cryptocurrency, the way I see it, is a very new thing, so it's unproven. It is the fastest growing asset class of all time, so you can't ignore it because we're an emergent phenomenon. So in a little bit. I think the question with cryptocurrency is, will people adopt it? If they do adopt it, in my opinion, it'll be something more along the lines of gold. It'll be a currency alternative. You can't pay taxes in Bitcoin. We're still going to need government. Hate to break it to all the libertarians out there. You need a law force. You need property laws, or it's just going to turn into a pirate society. And you can't pay your taxes in Bitcoin. So at that point, then, it will be at best a gold type thing, an alternative currency. I think the reason people like it and the reason it does well, when it seems to do well, is when they try to inflate our problems away. And that is one of the risks. It's why people have always liked gold. It's why I've always held some. But ultimately, the problem with those assets is they don't produce income. They don't generate money. Stocks and real estate generally are the kingpins of how you make money. Why? Is they generate income. I think the stock market is a bet on population growth almost entirely, which is terrifying, especially now that rates are at zero. I think it'll be very hard to make money there. And I think stocks have some unique abilities to reinvest your dividends and this sort of thing, but ultimately it's not going to be a panacea either. I really think it would be rough for everything. But I think capitalism survives no matter what. And let's be honest, Bitcoin's brand new. Dogecoin's very new. The stock market, the S&P 500, the 500 biggest companies in the world make money. Making money is not new, and it never goes out of style. That's why it's always been one of the best creators of wealth. It just never goes out of style. Bitcoin could go out of style. We'll find out. It's a new player and an emergent phenomenon.
So the world moves in waves this
Yeah.
past decade, and obviously the very Western centrist global society we live in.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
I think of our debt, and I think of how we're sort of headed towards this honestly just terrible phenomenon where maybe this inflation catastrophe. Assumingly, if the solo model of economics holds true, we slow down our growth in Western societies or developing societies with different doctrines who follow our current doctrine,
Right.
but different power centers come and grow to power.
Yeah.
Will that potentially augment all of our perspectives in some outside group?
I think for sure that would. Currently, I'm not concerned about it. Maybe 30, 40 years down the road, I would be. Currently, the data right now is that in terms of demographics, we're the best, and we're not that good. I mean, if you want a good resource to check out on this, Peter Zihan, I think his work's great. He says China won't even be a country by 2050, just based on their demographics. It's bad. You look at the global economic demographic information, and I'm not sure the emerging markets are threatened to anyone anytime soon. I think that risk is highly overplayed. And again, it just comes down to population. I think population is the big driver of the wave we're trying to understand, and their populations are way worse than ours. I can show you China real fast. If you pull up a chart of China's demographics in 1981, it looks like this. Age, this goes up by age, so this would be like 80 years old, this would be 1. half men, half women on each side, okay? Normally, it looks about like this. And today, it looks about like this. America looks like a bread box, and we're the best. By the way, all of history, the world has been about like that. Half men, half women, perfect pyramid. A lot of the emerging markets are inverting. Once this inverts, it's almost impossible to repopulate your population. So that's why I'm bringing this up. It's why I'm doing this talk. I don't think this isn't hyperbole, and it's not total theory. The demographic data, I believe, will force this in your guys' lifetime. I believe steady state economics is coming.
Do you think that they overturned Roe v. Wade because of population growth?
Do I think that's why? I think.
Well, because like you said.
Yeah. I think it. Well, I mean.
They say a lot about advocacy, whatever it is, but like secretly, do you think that like?
Do I think there's a global agenda?
There's an economic finance side to it. Do you think that would be?
Let me put it this way. I don't know why certain things happen, and I'm a political moderate. I believe the way truth occurs is by us grinding out things we can't figure out. I think it's actually how our species works. I think it's good. I think they have a very strong incentive to try to promote more population growth. Which, again, that was his question. I don't think it's the right solution, but I think that is going to be the solution. I wouldn't even be surprised at all in my lifetime if they just straight up hand out money to make babies. Because I think they're going to get desperate. Peter Zehan, by the way, he completely predicted the Ukraine invasion based on Russia's population collapse. This stuff's real.
How do you envision politics not getting in the way of a sort of transition to steady state capitalism?
Oh, I completely expect them to. I think a lot of things are getting, I think we will get forced into it no matter what. Because when a population goes, it goes, nothing you can do. And I think our species, I hope we use it to evolve and make better decisions. And, there's so many countries, so many factions, so many religions. You're talking about, world peace and kumbaya and us all getting along. But I'm just saying we either go there or we probably go extinct. So let's do it. Let's at least get this knowledge out there and at least have those conversations, at least get the mindset right. But yeah, optimism is not generally one of my strong suits. Yeah.
What's escape velocity look like in steady state economics?
Well, you'd probably have higher dividends and lower growth rates. You'd probably have more crashes and less central planning, which would be good. I actually think it might be easier because you'd have higher taxation and you'd have maybe more social benefits. Ideally, I actually think it would be easier and the wealth gap would be a lot less. So I don't think it would necessarily be bad. I think if you're in the top 1/10 of 1%, you probably wouldn't like it as much as you like your life now, and that will be the challenge. And let's be honest, those people have a lot of political power now. The super PACs are not a joke. There's a lot of money in politics now, like nothing we've ever seen. So they're going to protect their own interests. Terrifying, it's terrible, but it's a reality.
How does this risk model play out in the options market?
Well, you can see that it's a great question. First off, you can see Black-Scholes model will let you down. That is the model generally used for pricing options. What it means in terms of option, the one hedge fund I said I thought would do really well is extremely good at understanding the mathematics of options. It was what's that guy's name? Mark Spetzinger's fund. Can't remember the name of his fund, but I could see his how he used math would be more accurate on a longer term time scale. The problem is with options is when you're wrong, you go to zero. So one of the interesting things, if you can see this, when you really start taking things out to their limit, you can see that this model, well, what a fractal is the math of mapping the edge of chaos. So by saying that markets are fractals, which is exactly what I'm saying, you're saying it's already right on the verge of chaos. It's essentially like surfing. So when you start adding options, you're saying like, hey, what if I surfed on 1 foot? You're adding more complexity to a model that's already so insanely complex. I'd say your odds of success are probably approach zero. The few that can do it are probably they're exceptions. And who knows how long they'll last. You know, one of the things I noticed in the data I looked at, and one of the harsh realities of life, every single investor I ever looked up to, their returns got crappier over time, including Warren Buffett's. Well, it makes sense, right? It's an adaptive market. In fact, I personally wonder and probably highly believe to some degree value investing may not work anymore. Because everyone knows it. They teach it at every university. Well, that's about as adaptive as it gets. Yeah.
Isn't the decrease in Warren's returns just like scaled because of how large his company became? Like he even talks about how in his early days he was able to find much better deals like in the market, but just at like scale, it's just impossible.
I'm sure that's part of it, and that's what he says. I think he's been so successful, everyone in the world studies him. And he never talks about that. Of course, that's a huge part. Scale's part of it, but I think look, I think he would be killing it if no one else was doing value investing, even at that scale. Truth is, everyone does value investing. Everyone knows it. P ratios are everywhere, right? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not so sure on that. I think the market's adapted. I think one of the interesting things about Buffett in particular is if you really look at his strategy, he adapted his strategy over time to scale up, which made it hard for the adaptive market to catch up with him. But now I think both have coalesced. The size and the scaling and the massive competition have all come into account all at the same time. That's going to be hard. You know, that's a tough thing. In fact, I wonder if Berkshire Hathaway was not Berkshire Hathaway. If it hadn't been ran the way it's been ran, the dudes weren't 100 years, I wonder if they would just buy an index. I seriously believe that would what they would probably do if they were your age right now.
Well, I think that's their advice.
Well, of course, it makes so much sense. You know, it doesn't make sense because it's maybe the right answer. It makes sense because it gives you a very high probability of succeeding through a long period of time. There are other strategies. The question with an index, which one, which combination of indexes? You know, there's more indexes than there are stocks now. Oh, well, that got complex again. So you can see there's a little more to it. Any other questions? Yeah.
You said it wouldn't surprise you if governments basically started handing out cash incentives to have kids. I notice a trend that some of the countries in the world with the highest debt burdens are also some of the ones with the highest long-term demographic problems, like Japan and many countries in Southern Europe. Do you think that sort of coincidence throws a wrench in your potential hypothesis that they'll start handing out like cash incentives to have kids?
Well, Japan has the worst demographics in debt, and they just started handing out money to have kids. So it's already happening. So I guess I should say it would be, how could I be surprised if it's already happening? I mean, they're already doing it. Because again, I mean, of course, instead of embracing a steady state model, they're like more cowbell. It's always, of course. Yeah.
So it appears to me there's a different opinions, you could say, based on the political desire to increase populations.
Yep.
But then you have these other groups, like the World Economic Forum, who have a clearly stated goal to influence the reduction of the population on Earth.
Yeah.
And this group's very large and very influential. They've
Yeah.
influenced many universities and many companies, et cetera, et cetera. Who wins there and why?
Who wins in the ideology wars of the future? Hopefully we do, the people. I don't want either one of the. I mean, let's be honest. If what's occurring is what I think's occurring, we probably are giving all these people way too much power, too much respect, way too much control over our lives. You know, when they can tell you, lock up, get an injection, that's fine. I get it. We have to have government. We have too many people to let us all run our own lives. But where do we draw the line? And I don't know. Do you let them tell you to have kids? Do you let them tell them to not have kids? I mean, I don't know. That's tough. I hope humans win. I hope we all embrace democracy and our own freedoms, and let Mother Nature play itself out.
But specifically with population,
Yeah.
do you think the globalized narrative is more let's have children centered or more let's reduce population?
I think the globalists, it's reduced population, but I think the people in like DC, they want to stay voted in power, and they know that the only way to do that is to keep the breads and circuses and debt thing going. So I personally think they win because they're just they have too much at stake to watch their own voter base die. You know, they want to stay in power.
So you think essentially the governments have more incentive than these groups like the World Economic Forum?
Today, but it could change. I think if you really look at the incentive structures of humans, you know, if you look at monkeys, you could argue we're monkeys or not. I'm not going to get into any of that. But you just see that usually whoever's at top wants to stay at top. And I think that is a very human trait. I think whoever's there wants to stay. So that what you're asking me is who has more power?
Yes.
I would say right now it's the question is, are they separate?
Yeah. Right.
Or are they one and the same? If they're one and the same, then that's a bigger problem. But as long as we can trust our politicians to actually look after our own best interest and and that we are their voter base, that's what democracy is based on. And I know that's a big leap of faith for a lot of us. I would hope that they win. But you have to have, I guess on some level, to invest in anything or to even get out of bed, you have to have faith in your systems. You know, I have to have faith when I drive home that the roads are safe, the laws are safe for me to drive home, that there's cops. I mean, you have to have some faith in some system. But I don't know. I wonder that too. I wonder how far we go, and I wonder the same exact things. Klaus Schwab scares me to death. I sure hope that is not how it goes. When I study, and some of it just comes down to psychological models of how you frame the world, right? What is the Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates model for humanity? It's Skinner. It's B.F. Skinner. It's rewards and punishments, control, and ultimately it's a lack of faith in humans. So I think to some degree, it comes down to how much faith you have in humans. I have faith in humans. I believe in humanity. I believe in our democracy. I believe in our freedoms, and I believe we will work hard to fight for them when we have to. But right now we're pretty spoiled. So who knows? Yep.
Yeah, you think the rise of remote work might de-urbanize and push birth rates back up to kind of
That'd be good.
more?
Well, I mean, it would be good for a while, but ultimately,
Return in
Yeah.
birth rate from 1.6 to 1.8, and the UN projects it's going to go back up to 2. which is
Sure.
Replacement rate.
for how long? People are living longer. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the real question is what's the carrying capacity of the world? And that would be if you're going to go to a steady state, that's what you should target your steady state at. I have researched this a bit. The best scientists in the world say it's 2 to 3 billion. Oof. So if we go back to 2, it's just for a short period of time. And I showed you that chart. There's nothing about either one of those charts that's sustainable. You have to believe and have faith that some part of it will. I believe capitalism will sustain. But there's nothing about those growth rates, any of them.
Capitalism sustaining the population growth in the next 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, they've had some form of capitalism since the dawn of man. I think it'll survive the population collapse. Some form.
Possible that life expectancy extensions?
Totally possible. Which would be, yeah, sure.
Population growth?
Which could be crazy.
Yeah.
You can see it's a tough thing because we need the people to keep the economy growing at infinitum, which puts more pressure on the systems like the environment. There are these negative feedback loops, and you can't have them all. It's why we will probably within 100 years, 100% be forced into a steady state economics, or something way worse, decreasing. So I hope it's steady state. But like I said, we're the only species I know that can choose that. We can choose to work towards that. We're just choosing not to because we like our accoutrements a little too much. Fancy stuff. Yeah.
Two questions. I have $200. I'm a college student. I want to buy some stock.
Yeah.
What's the best, I don't know, if you're a hedge fund manager, maybe don't tell us, but what are some good things to maybe invest my money in to we can go stand the test of time?
I think for the vast majority of people, they don't have enough knowledge to do anything better than the S&P 500. I think you can do better. I know I can. But I don't think I can do too much better, and I don't think it's worth the risk for most people. That's the problem. Plus, if it goes bad and your brain can't figure out why it went bad, the odds of you hitting sell are off the charts. Let me show you guys just a little reality of how nasty markets are when they go. How far did the S&P the S&P didn't exist. How far did the Dow Jones fall in the Great Depression? 89%. Oof. Let's talk about a 60-40 portfolio, grandma's account. How far did that fall in the Great Depression? 70. Oof, grandma's eating cat food. Then it came back and fell 50% 4 years later. And this is supposedly the sleepy grandma portfolio. I don't think you guys could even deal with that, let alone grandma. You can see the markets are much more chaotic than people think. That's why when I said, if you're doing anything fancier than that, you start adding options, day trading, you're insane. Look how crappy it is on its own. And by the way, these were some of your best paths to wealth. This was just the nasty road there. And it is a nasty road. That's the reality people don't want to take. It's a lot like going to the gym. It's not always fun. Sometimes you hurt yourself. You're like, that sucked. Yeah.
Most of us are finance, accounting, econ majors. What other skill sets or disciplines, or I guess
Yeah.
you define wealth as not only money, but
Yeah.
also health and relationships?
Yeah.
What should we be investing or learning about?
I'll get into that. Actually, I want to come back to this. Why is this important? The important reason is when you're down 90% or 70%, your brain has to know why it won't stay there. If you're doing anything weird, if you're day trading, you hired a money manager, anything that's too esoteric, when you're this far down, your brain will have no way of comprehending why it would ever go back. You'll hit the sell button at exactly the wrong moment. That's the problem. It's not even investing well. It's having your brain have a concept of why this will continue to work at all, because these are the simplest things in the world, and they sucked. You can barely handle that. That's the problem. It's not even trying to get a high rate of return. Dude, Warren Buffett, he's been down 50% 3 times, and he started after the Depression. That's not easy. To your question, okay? I have been known to give these talks and be a little rambunctious, a little bit not PC. But The reason I do that isn't because that's actually who I am. It's because I'm trying to wake you guys up, stir your curiosity. I'm trying to not be PC. What I want you to do is start thinking outside the box. When I came to this school, it was not that PC. The world's changed, and that's fine. That's where the world needs to go. But you don't have to accept that. I think you should chase whatever makes you most curious, because then it's least interesting. And then you'll have new paths. If you're going into anything and you're not curious about it, you're not that interested in it, I'll tell you about a meeting I had with Tyler's friend. Someone came in to try to sell me software recently. I listened, I asked a few questions. And then I said, I know your mom. She's a biology professor. She was my biology professor. And I said, do you believe in instincts? Do you guys believe in instincts? I do too. And I said, my instincts tell me you're not very inspired by what you're doing. And I could tell in 10 minutes of meeting with someone. And the reason that's important is everyone has those instincts. They're know in 5 minutes if you like what you're doing or not, if you're interested. If you go into something that's not sparking your curiosity, you're probably not going to have a great career. Even if you make a lot of money, it could go to zero. You'll be miserable. Imagine trading your entire life for money, and then you're in an internment camp in World War II, broke. And you wasted your health, and your relationships suck. Well, you'd really be broke. So yeah, I think people should chase their interests. And that's different than chasing your passions. Being interested in something is a lot different than being passionate about something, because it requires a lot more work. Other questions? All right, I think we can wrap it up. Thanks.